Good evening. My name is Christopher Bruce, and I'm the political director for the ACLU of Georgia. Throughout this year, we've joined with our brothers and sisters across the state in defense of Black lives. We've been supporting protesters in the streets with our legal observers, and most recently, we proudly stood alongside partners in successfully repealing the citizens arrest law in the state of Georgia. The reality of continued police violence is painful, but we are daily reminded of our resiliency and the knowledge that we can and will force the change we deserve.
200 years later, we are still fighting that Black lives matter in the country we built. We are fighting to be free and equal in the country we built.
This is the newly released cell phone video that shows the traumatic last moments of 25-year-old Ahmaud Arbery's life.
Ahmaud is dead, and that the people that are responsible for his death are still at home with their families.
Hundreds gathered at a rally organized by the American Civil Liberties Union of Georgia.
No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace.
People from all creeds, from all walks and religions, from all races have come together to again say, we will not accept this type of behavior.
The Georgia ACLU is also demanding arrests.
We are not going away. We are going to keep standing and keep fighting until justice is done, not only in this case, but also so that no one ever has to fear jogging the streets anywhere in the state of Georgia.
Please welcome Abby Martin and Kevin Wilson. They are members of the Atlanta Bard, a group of lawyers who write, direct, and perform original music productions for the benefit of the Atlanta Bar Foundation.
Listen, baby, ain't no mountain high, ain't no valley low, ain't no river wide enough, baby.
If you need me, call me, no matter where you are, no matter how far.
Don't worry, baby,
just call my name, I'll be there in a hurry. You don't have to worry,
'cause baby, there ain't no mountain high enough, ain't no valley low enough, ain't no river wide enough to keep me from getting to you, babe. Remember the day I set you free, I told you you could always count on me, darling. From that day on, I made a vow I'd be there when you want me, some way, somehow. 'Cause baby, there ain't no mountain high enough, ain't no valley low enough, ain't no river wide enough to keep me from getting to you, babe. No, no, darling,
no wind, no rain, oh, winter's cold can't stop me, baby.
No, no, baby,
'cause you are my
you're ever in trouble, I'll be there on the double. Just send for me, oh, baby.
My love is alive, woo, way down in my heart, although we are miles apart.
If you ever need a helping hand, I'll be there on the double, just as fast I can. Don't you know that there ain't no mountain high enough, ain't no valley low enough, ain't no river wide enough to keep me from getting to you, babe. But know that there ain't no mountain high enough, ain't no valley low enough, ain't no river wide enough to keep me from getting to you, babe. To keep me from getting to you, babe. To keep me from getting to you, babe.
Hi, my name is Sean Young, Legal Director with the ACLU of Georgia. When Georgia attempted to end abortion, the ACLU of Georgia sprang into action. Our case centered the experiences of women of color who we know are disproportionately harmed by attacks to reproductive health care. While we have succeeded in court, we know the threats to reproductive freedom continue and we remain committed to protecting this core right.
Kemp has sent a clear message about whose lives are important and whose lives aren't important. And I must say, as a black woman living here in the state of Georgia, it doesn't feel like he thinks that my life is important.
Protesters in Atlanta rallied against Georgia's so-called heartbeat bill. It bans abortions once a fetal heartbeat can be detected.
These are personal and private decisions we make with our families, with our faith, with our physicians, not with politicians.
Today, abortion rights groups have sued the governor and others in federal court to keep the law from taking effect in January.
By banning virtually all pre-viability abortions, HB 481 is blatantly unconstitutional under nearly 50 years of Supreme Court precedent.
We will see you in court, yes. Governor Kemp. We are preparing with our local attorneys, with our national attorneys, with our coalition partners, a comprehensive challenge to the many ways that this bill is unconstitutional.
We are pleased to welcome Jack Kennedy, President of the Board of Directors of the ACLU of Georgia.
Good evening and welcome. My name is Jack Kennedy. I am the President of the Board of the ACLU of Georgia. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this year's annual membership meeting and to present to you the Board of Directors. This is our second virtual meeting, a reality we all know too well. I am optimistic, however, that next year we will be together in person. I want to take a moment to acknowledge what a challenge this past year was for our country and our state. The number of lives lost to COVID has been devastating. The wave of police killings of black citizens and acts of violence against Asian Americans have been painful reminders of the deep racism still plaguing our society. And we witnessed a violent takeover of the nation's capital. Yet throughout this, we have also witnessed and been a part of inspiring resistance, families and communities supporting each other through this public health crisis, citizens across the country exercising their First Amendment right to protest, calls for racial justice and Black Lives Matter taking center stage, and then unprecedented voter turnout. And we know here in Georgia what we were able to do. Our organization played an instrumental part in this. The staff, who under the leadership of Andrea Young, worked tirelessly into November, then into January, and then into the legislative session. Our members, supporters, and partners, each of you rose to the challenge of fighting for our democracy. While there remains much work left to be done and new challenges are certain to arise, because of you, the ACLU of Georgia has never been better prepared for its mission. And of course, our Board of Directors, which I am pleased to present tonight. Just elected for another 2-year term is Melissa Altman, Lisa Amon, Daniel Blackman, Carlton Fields, our new treasurer, Monica Helms, Barbara Latimer Jennings, Maria Del Rosario Palacios, Gail Podolsky, who is our national board representative, Harry Floyd Taylor, and Jeffrey Willard, our second vice chair. They will be joined by returning board members, Randy Butterfield, our first vice president, Russell Gabriel, Graydon Gordian, our secretary, Natalie Kang, Jack Kennedy, Bridget Ortega, our affiliate equity officer, Dan Vargas, and Michelle Walsh. Thank you all for your service. We'd now like to take a moment to recognize a board member who has recently stepped down. Wayne Chelikowski joined the board in 2009 and became treasurer in 2011. He has been an instrumental part of this affiliate, persevering through some difficult times and patiently working to ensure the organization's financial health. Wayne, we thank you so much for your service, and we wish you the best of luck in your next chapter. With that, I welcome you to tonight's annual meeting, a time to reflect on this past year, and to look ahead to what is to come. Each of you play a critical role in making this organization run, and together we will continue to be on the front lines of fighting for our democracy. Thank you, and enjoy the program.
Hi, my name is Nicole Robinson, Policy Analyst with the ACLU of Georgia. In 2020, we educated thousands of voters on our issues, holding dozens of town halls, virtual of course, with candidates all across the state. There is so much at stake when it comes to civil liberties, and we wanted to make sure voters are making informed decisions all the way down the ballot. Here's a look at the ACLU of Georgia educating voters. Currently, Georgia legislators are able to redraw districts to manipulate the boundaries to predetermine the outcome of elections, hindering voters from voicing their interests through their votes. The Georgia State Legislature can do this with the public knowing very little about how the redistricting process is done.
There's so much on the ballot this year, from criminal legal reform.
Black and brown people are disproportionately targeted for and harmed by its criminalization, so they're more likely to be subjected to stops, frisks, arrests, and convictions, and longer convictions for marijuana-related offenses.
To women reproductive health care.
It's incredibly important, I think, for all women, all people really, to be able to make decisions about their bodies that they think are best for themselves.
And to voting rights.
I pledge to vote and vote down the ballot because the threat to our rights and our democracy is closer than we think.
I'm registered to vote. Athens, are you?
Please welcome Andrea Young, Executive Director of the ACLU of Georgia.
Good evening, and thank you all for joining us this evening. I'm very proud of the work the staff, board, supporters, allies, and volunteers of the ACLU of Georgia have accomplished in these very challenging times. The universal right to vote is an unfinished business in the South, a struggle that is grounded in the denial of citizenship to African Americans. Georgia has been and continues to be a persistent offender when it comes to voter suppression, erecting hurdles and barriers to citizen participation in the democratic process. As the foundation of democracy, voting rights is our primary work, certainly for the next 4 years. Since January of 2017, when I came to the ACLU of Georgia, our eyes have been trained on protecting access to the ballot. The Georgia legislature, the Secretary of State, and counties across the state were continuing their patterns of voter suppression and finding new ways to deny the vote to people of color. That July, we saw the Secretary of State attempt to purge 160,000 voters from the rolls and try again the next year and this time targeting 340,000. These efforts were successful in allowing the Secretary of State to ascend to the position of governor by a narrow margin. Nevertheless, we persisted in the courts, in the legislature, working with coalition partners and winning victories along the way, including restoring voters to the rolls, overturning the abortion ban, fighting to end cash bail and abuses in prison, contesting the Muslim ban, protecting LGBT rights, protecting the right to protest. Over the past 4 years, our board has become even more diverse, with new expertise in finance, strategic planning, and community activism. Led by board member Lisa Amon, they developed a 3-year strategic plan that was approved a year ago. Our staff grew to 20, expanding the legal department led by Legal Director Sean Young, the political department led by Chris Bruce, Anna Maria Rosado leading the communications team, Kathy Egan leading development, and our Deputy Director, Lisa Adler, helping to keep this ship steady and moving in the right direction. We boosted our capacity for voting rights litigation, impact in the state legislature and local government, effective communications, and fundraising. And since January of 2020, more than 3,000 active volunteers supported our electoral and legislative programs, and 96 interns supported every aspect of our work. Building on our experience, we rolled out the Voter Access Project, led by Vasu Abhiraman, to improve election administration and ensure more access points for voting, build better linkages with state and county election boards, and expand our reach and deepen our work. We began 2020 prepared for the challenges we knew were coming, continued attempts at voter suppression, new and more elaborate voting machines that required tech skills and training, and then we adjusted for what we couldn't have anticipated, how COVID would threaten voter turnout. The Voter Access Project was a pathway to meet those challenges. We knew the presidential June 9th primary was going to be tough, but it became disastrous as many poll workers stayed home and stayed safe. Voting machines didn't work, and long lines were discouraging voters. That day, June 9th, galvanized us even more. By mid-July, we had devised and started advertising a new program to recruit poll workers. Georgia needed practical approaches to ensuring enough numbers of poll workers with the right skills and training who would ease voters' experience at the polls and minimize errors. Voting could become a better civic experience. With the help of 32 law firms, civic groups, service organizations, and bar associations, we collaborated to recruit and train over 2,700 poll worker candidates. Facilitated by the Secretary of State's office, we connected them to county election boards for training and placement, and eventually at least 650 poll workers and deputy registrars reported their service in at least 21 counties, and likely more. At least 10% of registered voters in Georgia had an ACLU recruited poll worker at their polling place on Election Day. The poll worker program changed everything by delivering a well-run election for a record number of voters. By Election Day, the long lines had dwindled and polling places ran smoothly. Voters were grateful. We had started something we could build on for next elections and that others around the country could replicate. The Stanford MIT Healthy Elections Project called it a national model, and it got attention across the country. And in a little while, you will hear from Dr. Bernard Fraga of Emory University on the evaluation. That's one way volunteers played an invaluable role in the election and in protecting the vote. There's more. Currently, the Peanut Gallery, which we share with the New Georgia Project, has 179 volunteers monitoring 83 county election boards that cover 80% of the population. This matters because each of Georgia's 159 counties makes its own decisions about election administration, the number of polling locations, budget, staffing, and importantly, how to respond to early voting weekend and evening voting days. From the presidential primary through to the Senate runoffs, volunteers were our ground force, phone banking and texting to ensure voters knew how to vote, when to vote, and why. I'm very pleased to say we saw success in Cobb and Gwinnett and in Athens-Clarke, and that the engagement of civil liberties voters influenced statewide results in the presidential and Senate races. During the Senate runoff, our legal team blocked a last-minute voter caging scheme impacting hundreds of thousands of voters in every county in the state. Had we not been successful, the scheme could have produced chaos in polls across the state and disenfranchised countless voters. 12 days after the Senate runoff, the Georgia legislature convened. Nicole Robinson ran point on the legislative program. That session was all-consuming, more so than we had anticipated, as legislators came prepared to dismantle what the Secretary of State had repeatedly assured the former President and Congress was a safe, secure, and accurate election. It appeared that the governor thought so too, at least when he was voting. Eventually, 117 different voting rights bills were introduced and boiled down to a couple of omnibus bills with new provisions tossed in randomly along the way. Despite COVID, our team was present at the Capitol, analyzing every priority bill, offering testimony, preparing questions, sending out action alerts, briefing friendly legislators, coordinating with partners. And as a result, the bill that emerged preserved weekend voting, automatic voter registration, and no excuse absentee voting. Nevertheless, Senate Bill 202 is a sweeping voter suppression bill that allows the state election board to take over local elections and requires photo ID to vote by mail. The governor signed the bill in a closed-door session on the day that it passed, and we immediately filed a federal lawsuit challenging Senate Bill 202. On the upside, Georgia is the first state to end citizens' arrest. Special thanks to our political director, Chris Bruce, who was too often at the Capitol for 7 a.m. meetings called by legislators and then testifying at hearings throughout the day. We got to know legislators on both sides of the aisle. Even if they didn't agree with our positions, they always respected the hard work, the dedication, the expertise, and the nonpartisan approach that we took to principle. The elections and legislators are over momentarily. Redistricting will be managed by the same legislators who just rolled back voting rights, and so our staff is coordinating with National ACLU, organizing for the legislature's special session, likely in November. We're also ready for another contentious legislative session early in 2022 as legislators look at what will benefit them heading into another election season. A lot of education will be necessary to mitigate the impacts of the new sweeping voter suppression law. We will be helping county election boards understand the decisions that are theirs to make, how many early voting days, for example. We will be educating voters through town halls, social media, and radio advertising to help voters navigate the new restrictions for the municipal elections this November and take it to scale for the 2022 elections. We'll keep investing in the poll workers and deputy registrars programs and expand the peanut gallery into 122 counties by 2022 and add new program areas to recruit any new county election board members in key counties. Our work has a statewide impact. From Glenn County on the coast to Floyd in the north, we are present and engaged. Just last week, we prevented a poll closure in Quitman County. I believe our work in voting rights and our very democracy is the gateway to the other rights we cherish. When elections are free and fair, the majority of Georgia voters support the right to vote, reproductive freedom, freedom of speech and assembly, civil rights for all, regardless of race, color, religion, national origin, sex, gender, sexual orientation, physical ability. With your help, we will continue to work toward our vision of a state that guarantees all persons the civil liberties and rights in the United States and Georgia constitutions and Bill of Rights. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Vasu Abhiraman, Policy Counsel with the ACLU of Georgia and the Director of the Voting Access Project. Tonight, I'm honored to recognize some superstar volunteers who stepped up in incredibly important ways to protect the right to vote in Georgia. First, let's take a quick look at what some of that work entailed.
When we saw the debacle that happened in June, where the lines you saw in the state of Georgia that made international news, we built on that framework to say we can recruit poll workers.
During the June 9th primary election, Georgia voters experienced long lines, trouble with the computers, and various other problems with in-person voting. To help ensure every vote counts, sign up today to become a poll worker for the upcoming elections. Together, we can protect every Georgian's right to vote.
We recruited over 2,500 people to serve as poll workers. We had an ACLU volunteer in every single poll in Fulton County.
We call it the 3 S's. We solicit, shepherd, and support poll workers to secure elections in Georgia.
Election day was calm. I do think that is because there was so much preparation that went into it.
We made it possible for 5 million people to vote in the state of Georgia.
We want to thank you, Andrea. You're great. You're amazing. You inspire me. What you do is just fantastic in one of our strongest offices.
Our success in this work depends on volunteers and interns who give it their all. And I'm pleased tonight to recognize the following individuals. Annabelle Luong, a superstar student at Georgia Tech who interned with us for the past year and has been truly indispensable to everything we've done, including the poll worker recruitment and deputy registrar programs, and our non-stop efforts to beat back restrictions to the ballot box during this past legislative session. Whatever we needed, whether it was calls to prospective poll workers on a Saturday night or bill analysis with a quick turnaround, Annabelle rolled up her sleeves and got to work. Abby Martin, whom you saw perform earlier, is an attorney and founder of the law firm Legal Muse, who dove in ballot first to our poll worker program, serving as a poll manager in Fulton County for multiple elections, including during early vote with record-breaking turnout, and then led a team of new poll managers from multiple polling sites on Election Day. She followed that up, working around the clock to count votes over multiple recounts, and then supported our team as a super volunteer for our legislative efforts. Tori Silas, partner at Smith, Gambrill, and Russell, and Rosalind Drakeford, Assistant General Counsel at Atlanticus Holdings Corporation, are Georgia attorneys who volunteered to serve as deputy registrars in Fulton County not once, but twice during the general election and the January runoff. From the wee hours of the morning until the polls closed, Tori and Rosalind were standouts in our effort to train and place hundreds of attorneys at polling locations to process would-be absentee voters under the highest standards of accuracy and care, and ensure that lines kept moving on Election Day. Shelley Carroll, owner and instructor at Dancing Dogs Yoga, volunteered as a legal observer coordinator during last summer's Black Lives Matter protests, and then organized legal observers throughout the entire state on Election Day in response to increasing tensions and threats of violence around the election. Many of the legal observers Shelley organized monitored multiple election recounts and served as watchdogs during legislative session, inside, outside, and under the Gold Dome. We honor each of you for your unwavering, tireless commitment to civil liberties, and all of the volunteers who power our work at the ACLU of Georgia.
My name is Andres Lopez Delgado, staff attorney with the ACLU of Georgia. Protecting the First Amendment right to expression and protest is fundamental to the ACLU. My parents, children of Puerto Rican migrants and lifelong activists, instilled in me the importance of exercising the right to protest, and I am proud to be part of an organization dedicated to defending it. Take a look at some of our work on this core issue over the past year.
I'm not happy that our children still have to take to the streets to fight for their lives, but I am proud of them. I am proud to stand with them, and I will fight for the right of you to express your First Amendment rights in this America that your ancestors bled and died for.
What this resolution does is intimidate ordinary citizens from criticizing.
Well, this is the letter the ACLU sent to Sheriff Wiltshire. The group says the new jail policy allows inmates access to only a few books already in the jail's book cart.
People who are detained in prison and jail have the First Amendment right to read a wide variety of newspapers, publications, magazines, books.
This is an educational moment about the civic passion of our students. And we educate citizens, we don't educate automatons. So we're proud of our students and we stand here with them.
Please welcome Dr. Bernard Fraga of Emory University. Dr. Fraga is a political scientist, commentator, and a voting rights expert. He will be joined in conversation with the Executive Director of the ACLU of Georgia, Andrea Young.
Thank you all so much. I'm gonna try to, y'all pretend I'm Oprah. So this is really great. Thank you, Dr. Fraga, for joining us tonight. And many of us have been hearing you on NPR. We've seen your op-eds. And when you started working with us, we didn't know we had gotten such a superstar. So we're really glad for your support of this issue of voting rights. And Emory is really lucky to have you with us at this time. So we wanted to invite you tonight as someone who can really, this is ACLU folks really want to know, they really want to know what's really happening, especially on voting rights. They're passionate about this issue, and this is something you've been studying for years, and you also were so gracious to help evaluate our poll worker program. Yeah. And so we really want to get your, get your feedback. So tell us, what we saw in terms of 2020 political engagement nationally and in Georgia. What happened and what did the numbers show us?
Well, when you look at the rate of voter turnout in the United States, the first thing that any analyst sees is that we have very low turnout compared to other industrialized democracies, compared to places in Europe, obviously. We're talking about something like 60% is a very high rate of turnout. Now, in 2020, nationally, we saw a record-breaking turnout. In fact, the highest rate of voter turnout since 1900. And back in 1900, women didn't have the vote. African Americans were effectively disenfranchised throughout the country, but especially in Georgia and states of the South. That record turnout was only 67%, so it's still a huge achievement. Almost 160 million Americans voted in 2020, but there's a lot more work to do still. One area where there's a lot more work to do is in the racial disparities in voter turnout. Now, because of socioeconomic inequalities, but also because of a lack of mobilization and engagement, African American turnout lags white turnout substantially by as much as 10, 15 percentage points. And Latinx and Asian American turnout historically and in 2020 lags even further behind. So even though we saw a record-breaking turnout in 2020, still about a third of Americans who could have voted didn't turn out, and that third of Americans were disproportionately Black, disproportionately Latinx, or disproportionately Asian American.
So there's a lot of work to do, a lot of opportunity for growth, as they say, in this area. So do you think this is a trend that will continue going forward, or was that just a blip because of the polarization around the former president?
Yeah, so when we looked at polling data from January, December 2019, January 2020, we all remember the very contested Democratic primary, obviously. Voter enthusiasm through the roof. 85% of Americans said, I'm absolutely for sure going to vote. And then COVID hit. Everyone was worried turnout would drop because Americans were going to have to change their routine. And indeed, in the Democratic primary elections and congressional primaries that we saw in the spring in Ohio and here in Georgia, right, high turnout, but lots of problems, long lines, issues with new voting technology, voters afraid to go to the polls, voting by mail where possible, but often having to wait in line socially distanced in the summer heat or in the rain. Made a lot of people really nervous about November, and that's why I think programs like what you all did with the poll worker recruitment program and deputy registrar program are so important, because there was a real risk in November with high enthusiasm, having a lot of voters left out in the cold, not here in Georgia, but left out in the cold in other states, and maybe not exercising their right to vote.
Mm-hmm. So what did 2020 teach us then about election administration and the extent to which some of the turnout is also related to these barriers to access?
What we saw was that in states that had an organized effort to try and make sure all of their citizens voted, states where you had no excuse absentee voting, for example, where many voters were able to vote by mail or vote early in person with an extended period of time to do so, or vote on election day, vote centers or polling places that weren't closed, right? That's where we saw higher turnout. Now, that means that in states that were all vote by mail, like Washington and Colorado, you saw even higher turnout than in places like Georgia. But here in Georgia, we were able to keep the pace relatively. In fact, the rate of voter turnout in Georgia was about the same as what it was nationally, and in the past, it usually lags a little bit. The enthusiasm with the Senate election is a big part of that, and the fact that Georgia was a very, very close state in the polling and in the final results. But the bottom line is that organizations on the ground were able to mobilize voters, especially voters of color, especially black voters, because there were opportunities to vote that were preserved through the efforts of the ACLU and other organizations in the state.
So what is the impact of vote by mail then on turnout? Is there a consistent that states that have high access to vote by mail have higher participation?
Well, that's a great question. That's something political scientists are actively exploring. The issue is none of this happens in a vacuum. As we're seeing here in Georgia, right? People think that turnout increases when you see vote by mail. That's the theory that's out there. There's some evidence to back it. But states that tend to pass those laws are ones that already have relatively high turnout, because the people who support those provisions oftentimes tend to be Democrats. Higher turnout tends to help Democrats. You see a pattern there. So it's tough to sort out how much of it is the places that would have high turnout even without vote by mail versus the places that have high turnout because of vote by mail. The one thing that's very clear is that in states that have very limited access to the ballot, and states that especially have big disparities in terms of race, socioeconomic class, and other issues, that's where you see low turnout, right? Make it more difficult to vote, you're going to see lower turnout.
So what lessons did we learn about how to advance equity in election administration in Georgia in this past election?
I think the big lesson that we saw is that if you give voters opportunities to vote, if you expand the opportunities that voters have available in terms of the methods they can use, they will vote. They will turn out. Even with COVID, even with the pandemic, even with all of the other issues going on, the economic impact of COVID, again, disproportionately hitting communities of color, especially the black community here in Georgia, right? Voters will still participate. And that, again, I think means that we need to redouble our efforts, especially in light of the HB 202. We need to redouble our efforts to make sure that the right to vote is preserved and that voters have the options that they had in the pandemic, even when, hopefully, we're out of this next year.
Yeah, we kind of felt like we finally got it under control, and then they changed the rules. So now you have really looked at our poll worker program and some of the things that we did. Of course, as you know, the June primary was a complete debacle. And so we launched our poll worker program. It was something we had never done before. We kind of said, as I said to my staff, you need 4 different computers to work in order to vote with the new machines. And I said, and if there's a paper jam, I'm not the person who responds, right? So we really needed some digital natives, some real tech-savvy people in these polling places. And typically, poll workers, are 60 and up. So, we really put an emphasis on recruiting younger people, more tech-savvy people, and attorneys in every polling place to really back up the managers of those poll workers when there were questions. So what were some of the data points you gathered on our work, and what did you learn?
Sure. So, as was mentioned earlier, at least 10% of Georgia registered voters had an ACLU poll worker recruitment program placed individual at their polling place. And when I talked to election administrators here in Fulton, at least they said without the ACLU poll worker program, there would have been a shortage. There would have been a problem. There would have been the lines, maybe not to the extent we saw in June, but there would have been issues. Issues that might have caused individuals to look at the line, turn around, go home, or go to work, because we know that given the polling place hours that we have here in Georgia, that impedes voting access for people who are working hourly. So, that's one point. The second thing is that translates into about 700,000 Georgians who had a polling place, worker in Fulton County, a lot in the metro, but also in other counties around the state. Now, if you add the number of people who were involved in the deputy registrar program throughout Fulton County, it's about 16% of registered voters in Georgia had one ACLU recruited individual at their polling place, at least, and some had more than one. Now, we obviously didn't have the lines that we saw in June, right? Provisional balloting in terms of rejected provisional ballots was far, far lower as well in the November election versus what we saw in June. A lot of reasons for that, but the deputy registrar program obviously contributed there as well. But I think the big story and one of the big outcomes that I'm looking at and continuing to look at now is the poll workers themselves, the volunteers themselves. They reported it was a transformative experience. Now, many organizations were doing recruitment, but the training offered by the ACLU made it different, made it special, right? Those individuals got to understand the importance of the vote and to really understand also, not just on the tech-savvy side, but also just the law-savvy side of things, right? Understanding how to help voters when other poll workers, oftentimes older, maybe a little bit jaded too about the electoral process, especially with the pandemic, weren't really lending a helping hand to the degree that they should have. So I think that the downstream effects of the poll worker program on volunteers, obviously, right, but also on the voters that they helped, right, it can't be underestimated. I think that's a big part of the story too. Now, my hope going forward is that obviously this program can continue, but that county officials will want your recruits to be placed at their polling places because they understand how well they perform.
So do you think this is something that can be replicated in other communities?
Well, I think that, first it's about replicating in other counties in the state. You didn't have, a majority of counties didn't have ACLU recruited poll workers or deputy registrars, obviously, in their polling places, right? That opportunity wasn't there. And, a lot of that is in rural counties with a smaller population, but expanding in the state is important. When you talk about other places, I've worked the polls in California and Indiana, same problems, right? Disproportionately older, so disproportionately white, poll worker population. It's people who know what they're doing, but maybe don't know the newest technology. Yeah. Maybe don't know how to help the voters that are voting for the first time.
Yeah.
As I mentioned before, a third of Americans who could have voted and a third of Georgians who could have voted didn't turn out in this super high turnout, record turnout election. If we want to keep this momentum going, it's going to mean bringing new people into the electorate. People maybe who are limited English proficient, people who don't understand the technology and need a helping hand. And so I hope that it can be expanded in other places and it serves as a model for other states, other affiliates to say, this is an important way we can impact democracy in a positive direction.
Well, thank you. That's certainly what we were hoping to do. And it was certainly my feeling that the atmosphere in the polling places where we had ACLU recruited folks was really about civic engagement and a celebration of democracy. And that's what people should experience every time they go to vote. So thank you very much. And thanks to the volunteers and the staff that made the poll worker program so successful in this election.
Thank you so much.
My name is Rahul Garabadu, and I'm the voting rights staff attorney at the ACLU of Georgia. In 2020, we saw how litigation could help ensure that the right to vote was protected and that adequate resources were dedicated to elections administration. Our efforts helped streamline voting by mail and ensure that every eligible vote was counted. Here's a snapshot of some of our work protecting the sacred right to vote.
Now, in this lawsuit, the ACLU says they plan to force the 4 largest counties in Georgia to get their act together when it comes to elections.
Well, what we would like is for the judge to order the counties to do what's necessary to provide sufficient resources for these elections.
And both parties have failed to protect the sacred and constitutional right to vote for all citizens.
Some voters in Randolph County, Georgia are outraged because the Board of Elections is trying to close 7 of its 9 voting precincts.
Our concern is that this was voter suppression, reduced the African-American turnout especially, and that's just not acceptable.
Young attended this morning's vote and said it took approximately a minute with the 2-person election board unanimously deciding to keep all 9 polls open.
Well, Rachel, we are pushing back with everything that we can. My staff is every day at the Capitol, 7 a.m. hearings, analyzing every bill. We plan to fight right through midnight on Sine Die, the last day. We have seen, some success in pushing back.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ryan J., founder of Homegrown Poetry.
fact you should know about me is that I'm from Georgia. Like, from Georgia. Like, understand that Atlanta and the rest of the state are two different places from Georgia. Like, in ascending order, I've driven on 10, 16, 20, 75, 78, 85, and 95 from Georgia. Like, can name almost all 159 counties. If you give me a hint from Georgia, like, know that Lake Lanier's haunted from Georgia, like, regularly shoot the hooch from Georgia, like, have a favorite wing spot in Atlanta, Macon, Columbus, and Savannah from Georgia, like, old enough to know that I'll love Georgia more than Georgia will ever love me. Did you know, in Georgia, people of color play wind chime dangerous. Here, they turn our names into an empty ringing. A chorus or marching band harmonizing to the sounds of growing kudzu. Make it so any citizen or police officer with a gun can have a bad day at our expense. Last year in Georgia, the state watched as two men strung a black boy my age by the hollow in his bones. Gawked as they blew bullet casings into a warm Georgia breeze. Heard the holy in him sing its way to the asphalt of a residential neighborhood where he was taking a jog. Another in a Wendy's parking lot where he was too drunk to drive home. Here in Georgia in 2021, a white supremacist murders 6 Asian women in broad daylight and the police don't bat an eye. Swallow the whole of his sins saying every wind chime rings eventually. They see our bodies as expendable here. Use our labor to build their systems, win their victories, and then wonder why we don't trust them. Did you know? In Georgia in 2021, it's actually 1963, or at least that's what state Republicans think. Decided a blue Georgia sounded a little bit too much like equity. Decided voting sounded a little bit too much like freedom. Decided it couldn't possibly be freedom if everyone has it, because that's not how Georgia works. Georgia will serve you dinner and then ask you why you're eating. Will spit in your face and then ask you why you're wet. Will tally your vote and then say that you committed fraud. Georgia will let you know that it loves you and doesn't want you in the same breath, but despite it all, if there's one thing that you should know about me, it's that I love Georgia more than Georgia deserves and will spend the rest of my life fighting for a Georgia that works for everyone. I dare to dream of a Georgia that loves its marginalized communities back, a Georgia that defends those who can't defend themselves. I dream of a Georgia that wants us alive and breathing, a Georgia that eats oppression and picks its teeth with the skeletons of white supremacy. I dream of a Georgia that doesn't criminalize women's bodies, one that lets trans people be themselves. I dream of a Georgia that I can be proud of, a Georgia that I want to be from, a Georgia that loves me more than I could ever imagine. And one day that Georgia will be mine. One day that Georgia will be ours. One day I'll stand tall and proudly declare, oh, I'm from Georgia, like from Georgia. And everyone will know exactly what I mean. But until then, hi, I'm Ryan J. And I'm from Georgia, like from Georgia. Like old enough to know that Georgia doesn't love me back from Georgia, but determined enough to know that one day it will. Thank you.
Your continued support, membership, volunteerism makes this work possible. With your help, we will continue to stand for reproductive freedom for all people, access to the ballot for all citizens, free speech and the right to protest, the rights of immigrants and members of the LGBTQ community, the transformation of our criminal legal system, and racial justice. Black Lives Matter. We cannot thank you enough. Thank you all for sharing this time with us and for all you do to protect and promote civil rights and civil liberties. Good night.